What if I am a woman? So what if I'm a woman? What if I am a woman? These are the words of Mariah W. Stewart. I don't know what her voice sounds like, but her words are still powerful to this day. When I came to Mariah Stewart's work, I approached it first wanting to know about the current black female moment. The black girl magic, the black girls rock, the Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. I wanted to know where it started. Where did the African American female consciousness take its beginnings, politically speaking? I specifically wanted to focus on the consciousness of the African American female, birthed out of America's peculiar institution of slavery, but constructed by and for herself. Mariah Stewart is aptly and specifically helpful because she left her extant text for us to study and is the first female of any color to have extant political speeches and essay texts. So with her, I found a space to try to understand this black woman, the one you see in front of you, and many others in a new and compassionate way. While Mariah's work has been considered for the amazing way she crafts faith into political protests, my specific area of study seeks to find the African American female consciousness, the intersectionality that is in her work. And what I found is resistance. A resistance that is necessarily built in order to unify the many disparate and dissociative trends that make up the African American female's triple consciousness to alter Du Bois for the specific black female context. The African repels the American repels the African. The female repels the pure white Protestant female American. The only way to hold the African, American, and the female all together is to resist the negative dialectical tensions that are between these three items that make up the entire whole of the African American female. Mariah W. Stewart explicates this African American female consciousness not only in the content of her writing, but in the specific rhetorical strategies she uses to build it. Her rhetoric itself must resist the guiding principles of assimilation in the anti-slavery society in the 1800s, the move for black colonization back to Africa, and the true pious womanhood of the 19th century Protestant church that repelled an unmarried, unchildbearing, rebellious, loud, talkative, political woman. Through the act of casuistic stretching, Stewart utilizes and grounds her messages in the guiding principles of the anti-slavery society, while also re-articulating them as an act of resistance to those grounding principles that contradict her consciousness as an African American female. However, current historical critiques of Mariah W. Stewart often associate her with respectability politics, which is today largely regarded as a failing form of resistance because it places the burden of equality on the victim, making the job of black people to remove racist opinions by assimilating to white consciousness. I contend that many studies associate her with falling in line with the respectability politics of the anti-slavery society of William Lloyd Garrison because they do not fully explicate the entire dearth of her work for its rhetorical strategies of casuistry and rearticulation. I studied her 2 essays and 4 lectures given over a 3-year span and found that Stewart evolves over time. She begins her work using casuistic stretching defined by Kenneth Burke, framing freedom for slaves under the framework of Garrison, applying the respectability politics of the anti-slavery society. Over time, her work evolves and takes on the form of rearticulation, explained by Patricia Hill Collins, applying anti-racist principles to resist the intersecting oppressions between her Africanness, her Americanness, and her womanness. Before getting into the specifics of her text, let's baseline everyone on some of this terminology. So first, casuistic stretching. That, again, is defined by Kenneth Burke. It is a rhetorical device used to announce new principles while staying embodied within old principles. Historically, casuistic stretching has not worked to produce political change, specifically in the early 19th century women's movement, because you must dissociate yourself from the grounding principle or you get knocked right back into the thing that you wanted to get rid of, and you end up oppressing yourself again. For Maria Stewart, the grounding principle of the Anti-Slavery Society was defined by William Lloyd Garrison, who she worked closely with and published her essays in his publication, The Liberator. Garrison pressed for free blacks to challenge every law which infringes on your rights as free Native citizens and to respect yourself if you desire the respect of others. They had acquired and would continue to acquire the esteem, confidence, and patronage of the whites in proportion to their increase in knowledge and moral improvement. Garrison urged blacks to acquire money because money begets influence and influence respectability. Garrison worked under the respectability politics presumption, explicated by Higginbotham in 1994, that the more closely blacks modeled whites in their habits, that the white opinions of them would rise. Our next key term is rearticulation, which according to Michael Omi and Howard Wynette and Patricia Hill Collins, it is a conscious method to correct the failures of the old principles. Thus, according to me, when paired with casuistic stretching, it solves the problem of snapping back to the oppressive principles. For Maria Stewart, rearticulation required a specific use of anti-racist principles. Anti-racist principles, according to Ibram Kendi, contend that people should be treated equal simply because they are human. It rejects racial oppression and understands that good and bad are a part of all forms of humanity. Righteousness and evil can be found in every race. Thus, there is no room for superiority of any race. Maria Stewart uses casuistic stretching and rearticulation by evolving over time from a guiding principle of respectability politics to one of rearticulation to define the African American female consciousness of her time period. I will now provide the details of my findings contextually. First, Maria argues for the American consciousness of the African. In her first essay in The Liberator, October 1831, it was written to a dual audience of majority whites and black readers. And Stewart writes, "Prove to the world that though black your skins as shade of night, your hearts are pure, your souls are white." In this, she urges her kin to prove they are American by character, by acting ethically and morally according to the Word of God. In this same essay, in calling for freedom from slavery, she writes, "Then why have not Africa's sons the right to feel the same? Are not their wives, their sons, and their daughters as dear to them as those of the white man's? We will not come out against you with swords and staves as against a thief. But we will let you know that our souls are fired with the same love of liberty and independence with which your souls are fired. We will tell you that too much of your blood flows in our veins, too much of your color in our skins, for us not to possess your spirits." She says, "Blacks have enriched the soils of America with their tears and blood." This makes the black people in America American by consubstantiality with the land and the people. They are connected to the soil and the white man by blood, by tears, by sweat. Thus, they are American. This is absolutely important when the Anti-Slavery Society was pushing for colonization of blacks back to Africa, a place Maria did not know. Next, Maria argues for the African conscious of the American black. And this particular argument changes over time. In her spring 1832 lecture to the African American Female Intelligence Society, she uses respectability politics, reminding the women to teach their sons to be ethical and educated. She urged women to have firmness of character, and she refused to believe that racism was the problem in America. Using the Haitian uprising as an example of what black people can be, but also saddened by the current state of Haiti, she said, "And why is it, my friends, that we are despised above all the nations upon the earth? Is it merely because our skins are tinged with a sable hue? No, nor will I ever believe that it is." In this, she shows that she truly believes that blacks were despised because they didn't have a firm, godly character, and not because people were simply racist. Then, a few months later, in September 1832, at her most popular lecture at Franklin Hall to a promiscuous audience of black and white males and females, Taking a biblical verse about lepers standing outside the town gate waiting for someone to bring them food in 2 Kings 7:3, Stewart asked her audience, "Why sit ye here and die?" We cannot take for granted that very first question. In it, she expresses her anger with the failures of assimilation. Sitting. It's a stagnant position of inferiority caused by the failures of respectability politics. She goes on to describe her conversations with white women who still won't hire black women who are aptly prepared for the job. Even when black women tried to assimilate, they found themselves at a disadvantage in seeking employment. In this speech, Mariah confirms that the reason for black servile position was prejudice, ignorance, and poverty. This speech is where she separates herself from the guiding principles of the Anti-Slavery Society and utilizes rearticulation to invigorate the black audience to resist the oppression by becoming educated and continuously working toward freedom. 5 months later, in a speech to black men at the African Masonic Hall, she makes a completely anti-racist appeal regarding the African consciousness. She says, "History informs us that we sprung from one of the most learned nations of the whole earth, from the seat, if not the parent, of science. Yes, poor, despised Africa was once the resort of sages and legislators of other nations, was the esteemed school for learning, and the most illustrious men in Greece flocked thither for instruction." She contends that Africans were worthy of emulation in their own right, and as children of Africa, black Americans are endowed with the same spirit. Finally, in her farewell address, after only speaking publicly for 3 years, Mariah leaves her stand with a somber address filled with levels of disappointment regarding reactions to her speeches. She surmises that the world has not been a friend to her because it is not a friend to God. She acknowledges her fear of speaking up as a woman and having her words falsely represented. But yet, her farewell uses rearticulation to make an anti-racist plea for future female politicians and urges that purpose of their existence. She says, the black female is curious and complete, that the standards of womanhood are beset upon black women to be treated equally. She says black women have a divine consciousness. She uses biblical characters like Deborah, Mary, and the Samaritan woman, and 13th and 15th century Western women to support her argument that women can be mothers, judges, lifesavers, influencers. She declares women are provided with wit, talent, and genius. In so doing, she formulates the final note of the African American female consciousness and the necessity to resist any elements, internal or external, that counteract that consciousness or seek to divide it or make it false. What we see in Mariah is this: with the African identity consistently standing in oppression to the American identity, respectability politics enabling anti-racism, and the pious feminine ideology imposing on black female womanhood, Mariah Stewart had to dissociate herself from the guiding principle of the abolitionist movement. She had to become resistant, and she had to impart resistance in the women who would come after her. To resolve the triple deficient consciousness, Stewart used casuistry and rearticulation. By embodying a spirit of defiance within the African American female consciousness, resistance acts as a mediator between the conflicting roles of the triple consciousness to integrate the dissociative trends. This study allows us to acknowledge the mediating forces that occur within the African American female conscience and better understand the attitudes and reactions of contemporary black females. By utilizing rearticulation to address the issues of Burke's casuistry, this study asserts the relevance of black feminist rhetorical techniques to the rhetorical canon. So, when we think of black girl magic and ask where the magic lies, it is in the ability to connect 3 opposing dialectical forces and unite them into one. The magic is in her ability to define herself for herself despite everything that seeks to destroy her. Thank you.